The wagon wheel struck ice beneath the fresh snow. Thomas Brennan felt the jolt an instant before he heard the crack. Time seemed to stretch and slow as supplies shifted, and his three sons cried out. The world tilted on a wrong axis, and his shoulders slammed into the frozen ground with a force that stole his breath. Pain exploded in his left side. When he looked up, three small faces stared down at him from the wagon bed, framed by the fading afternoon light. Snow was already gathering on their lashes. Their breath plumed in the air, small clouds of warmth fighting a losing battle against the December cold. "Pa?" Daniel's voice cracked. He was 10, trying to be brave and failing. The boy's hands gripped the edge of the wagon so tightly his knuckles were white. Tom pushed himself up with his good arm. His shoulders screamed in protest. He'd wrenched it badly, maybe broken something. Through the thickening snow, he could see the wagon lying on its side, one wheel spinning uselessly against the gray sky. The axle, he could see even through the white curtain falling around them, was sheared clean through, the wood splintered, and the iron bent beyond any quick repair. "Everyone out. Careful now." They climbed down one by one, small hands grabbing the wagon's sides for balance. Daniel first, then Samuel, then Benjamin. At 5, Benny looked like he might cry, but he didn't. Good boys. Beth had raised good boys before. Tom cut the thought short. He couldn't go there. Not now. Not with his sons' lives depending on a clear head. He walked around the wagon, calculating. 15 miles to the nearest settlement. The temperature was dropping fast. It had been all afternoon. The blizzard that had been threatening since noon was here now, swallowing the Montana landscape in white. He could barely see 10 feet in front of him. The wind cut through their coats as if they were made of paper. "Can you fix it?" Sam asked. At 7, he still believed his father could fix anything. He still trusted that Pa knew what to do. Tom looked from the broken axle to his sons. They were already shivering, despite their heavy coats. He had made this supply run on Christmas Eve to avoid the empty house on the ranch, to flee the memories of Beth in every corner, the way she hummed while she cooked, the sound of her step on the stairs, the empty chair at the table where she used to sit. A year and a half since she died, birthing their 4th child. A year and a half of barely holding things together, of burning meals and forgetting to mend clothes and watching his sons become quieter, smaller versions of themselves. And now his grief, his cowardice in running from an empty house on Christmas Eve, might kill his children. Tom knew the numbers. He'd learned them working for the Northern Pacific Railroad, laying track across these territories. At 10 below zero, with a wind chill like this, hypothermia would set in within 90 minutes for a grown man. For children, especially the younger ones, it would be faster, 60 minutes, maybe 45. And this overturned wagon offered no shelter from the wind that was beginning to howl across the open plain. "We can't stay with the wagon," he said, forcing his voice to be steady. "We'll freeze." "But where will we go?" Daniel's eyes looked older than his 10 years. He'd grown up fast since Beth died, taking on responsibilities no child should carry, helping his father with Sam and Benny, trying to be the man of the house when Tom fell apart. Tom had no answer. Stay here and freeze for certain, or walk blind into the storm, and maybe freeze anyway. What a choice for a father to give his sons on Christmas Eve. But at least walking gave them a chance. Staying was death, slow, cold, and certain. "We'll stay together," Tom said, taking Daniel's hand. "Hold hands. Don't you let go for anything. Do you understand? Nothing makes you let go." He was pulling the boys close, preparing to pick a direction and pray, when Benny pointed into the white gloom with a small, gloved hand. "Pa, I see something." Tom squinted into the white darkness, the wind stinging his eyes. At first, nothing. Just snow and more snow, and the gray-white void of a Montana blizzard. Then there, maybe a half-mile off, maybe less, a faint light, soft and golden against all that white. It could be real. It could be his eyes playing tricks in the snow. It could be their only chance. "Boys, stay close." We walked toward the light. "Don't let go of each other." Daniel took Benny's hand. Sam grabbed Daniel's other hand. Tom took Sam's free hand with his own good arm, holding his injured shoulder as still as he could. The pain was a constant, hot wire now, running from his shoulder down his spine. They stepped into the white darkness, the light, their only hope. Every step was a battle. The snow was knee-deep in places, thigh-deep in others. Tom half-carried Benny through the worst of it, the boy's legs too short to manage the drifts that came up to his waist. His bad shoulder ached with every movement. But the pain didn't matter now. Only moving forward mattered. Only that distant light. Daniel struggled but didn't complain. The boy had learned not to complain in the last year. He had learned to swallow his own pain to keep from adding to his father's burden. Sam fell twice, the snow packing into his coat, his small face growing pale with the cold. Each time Tom hauled him up with his good arm, checked that all three boys were still with him, and kept them moving. Behind them, the wagon vanished into the whiteness. Ahead, the light grew stronger. It wasn't a mirage. It was real, solid, becoming clearer with every painful step. A house emerged from the storm like something from a dream, small but sturdy, built low to the ground to brace against the Montana winds. Smoke curled from the chimney despite the gale, and Tom felt something loosen in his chest. Hope. Desperate, painful hope. He raised his fist to knock just as the door swung open. A woman stood there, silhouetted by the firelight within. In her 30s, Tom guessed, in that first frozen moment. Her hands were worn, the kind that came from years of frontier work. Dark hair was pinned back in a practical bun, and her eyes took in injury and need in a single glance. The kind of assessment that came from training or hard experience, or both. "Get to the fire," she said. It wasn't a question. It was a command. The voice of someone accustomed to emergencies, accustomed to making the split-second decisions that meant the difference between life and death. "All of you, now!" She pulled them inside, blocking the door with her body against the wind that tried to follow. The warmth hit Tom like a physical wall. Heat from a roaring hearth, from a well-chinked cabin, from safety. Benny's teeth were chattering so hard he couldn't speak, his lips beginning to turn blue at the edges. The woman moved with swift purpose. Her every move was economical, precise. She wrapped the boys in quilts she pulled from a chest. She stoked the fire until it crackled, adding wood with practiced efficiency. She put coffee on the stove, real coffee, the kind that cost money out here. She set water to heat in a big kettle, all of it in under a minute, with no wasted motion. Each movement revealed someone who knew exactly what hypothermia looked like, and exactly what to do about it. Tom watched her, dizzy with relief and pain. His shoulder throbbed with every beat of his heart. The room swayed slightly at the edges. The house was simple, but welcoming. Clean, orderly. A small sprig of pine decorated a corner. A Montana Christmas, simple and solitary. Two candles burned on the mantel. One place was set at the table. She lived alone. On the wall hung a framed wedding photograph. The woman and a bearded man, both young, both full of hope. Both dressed in their Sunday best, facing a photographer's camera with the sober expressions people wore for important occasions. The man's hand rested on her shoulder. Her hand covered his. A moment of happiness, frozen in time. "Sit," she said to Tom, gesturing to a chair by the fire. Her tone left no room for argument. "That shoulder needs to be looked at." "Ma'am, we don't want to be a bother. We'll just get warm and then we can—" "You'll sit or you'll fall. The choice is yours, mister." Tom sat. The room tilted as he did, his vision graying at the edges for a moment before clearing. The woman brought warm water in a basin and a clean cloth that smelled of lye soap. She examined his shoulder with careful fingers, her touch professional and sure. She knew what she was doing. This was not the first injured man she had tended. "You've sprained it badly," she explained as she worked. "Possibly a hairline fracture. Maybe torn the cuff, but nothing is broken clean through. The bone is intact. Ice and compression for the first day. Then gentle movement to keep it from seizing up." She wrapped it with strips of clean cloth, her movements practical and efficient. "You're lucky," she said, her voice matter of fact. "It could have been worse. A broken collarbone, a shattered joint. You'd have lost the use of the arm." By the fire, wrapped in blankets that smelled of cedar and lavender, Benny whispered something to Sam. Tom couldn't hear the words over the wind battering the walls, but he saw the woman's hands pause for a moment over the basin. She had heard what Benny said. She had heard. "Coffee?" she asked Tom, not meeting his eyes. Her voice had become guarded, neutral. "Yes, ma'am, thank you." She poured 2 mugs and handed one to him. Their fingers brushed for an instant. They both pulled back quickly, in that clumsy dance of strangers conscious of propriety. The coffee was hot and strong and real, not the weak chicory blend some frontier families made do with. Tom wrapped his good hand around the mug and felt the warmth seep into his numb fingers. Outside, the storm raged. The wind shrieked at the corners of the cabin, rattling the shutters, searching for any crack or opening to exploit. Inside, something else was stirring. Something dangerous and unknown and impossible to name. The woman knelt to finish bandaging his shoulder, her movements gentle and sure. Tom found himself watching her face, the concentration there, the care she was taking with a stranger and his sons. Their eyes met for the space of 3 heartbeats. Both looked away. The moment stretched, taut with something unspoken, awkward and electric all at once. Tom cleared his throat. The woman stood abruptly, turning back to the stove. "What's your name?" Benny asked suddenly, his voice small but curious. The boy had stopped shivering enough to speak, the color returning to his cheeks. The woman looked at him, and her expression softened in a way that made Tom's chest ache. "Catherine," she said. "Most folks call me Kate." "I'm Benny. That's Sam. And that's Danny. And that's Pa." "Thomas," Tom said, finding his voice. "Thomas Brennan. We're grateful, ma'am. More grateful than I can say." "Kate," she corrected. "And there's no need for gratitude for following the law." Tom understood. A light in the window means no one passes by. It was the unwritten law of the Montana Territory, a law written in the blood and bone of those who had died alone. When a blizzard hit, when the temperature dropped, when the snow fell so thick you couldn't see your hand in front of your face, You put a light in your window. And if someone knocked on your door, you let them in. No questions asked, no payment expected. Because next time, it could be you out there in the storm. Next time, it could be you who needed shelter. The storm was too bad to talk of leaving tonight. Kate said as much without saying it, by the way she started pulling out food for supper, by the way she glanced at the darkening window and then at the boys. Tom knew it too. They would be spending the night. They had to. To go back out there now would be suicide. Storm's too bad to think about leaving tonight, Kate said, making it official. You'll stay. I'll make supper. It wasn't an offer. It was the law of the frontier, and Tom was grateful beyond words. Kate moved to the stove and Tom watched his sons watch her. They had seen neighbor women since Beth died, plenty of them. Mrs. Hartford from town, bringing casseroles and pitying looks. Mrs. Coleman from the next ranch over, trying to help in her own clumsy way. But none of them moved like this. None of them had this quality of being purposeful and kind and present all at once. None of them looked like someone who had been alone for a very long time and remembered what it meant to care for others. Kate made a stew with what she had: potatoes, carrots, onions, and a little salt pork. Simple food, frontier food. But the way she prepared it, the care she took, made it something more. She added dried herbs from a bundle hanging in the window: sage, thyme, and something else Tom couldn't place. The smell filled the small cabin, rich and warm and alive. The boys ate as if they hadn't had a decent meal in months. And the truth was, they hadn't. Tom had burned everything lately, too distracted by grief to focus on cooking, too lost in memory to measure ingredients or mind the heat. The boys had learned to eat what was served without complaint, to be grateful for the food even when it was scorched, or undercooked, or tasteless. But this was different. This was food made with attention, with care. Food made by someone who understood that a meal could be an act of love. "Slow down, Benny," Kate said gently, as the boy began to wolf down the stew. "You'll make yourself sick." Benny obeyed instantly, slowing his pace to careful spoonfuls. Tom watched as Sammy and Danny did the same, responding to her quiet authority. They responded to her in a way they hadn't responded to anyone since Beth died. Some quality in her voice, some kindness that didn't feel like pity, made them want to please her, made them want to be the good boys their mother had raised them to be. After supper, Kate let the boys explore the house with a single instruction. They could look, she made clear, but they were not to touch anything without asking. They found a spare room, plainly furnished. A small loft, accessible by a ladder, was clean and empty. There were no children's things anywhere in the house. No toys, no small clothes, no sign that a child had ever lived here. On the wall, a framed wedding photograph caught Daniel's eye. The boy stared at it for a long moment, before turning to Kate. "Your husband?" he asked, his voice cautious. Tom started to scold him for prying, but Kate gave a slight shake of her head. She didn't seem offended by the question. Instead, she looked at the photograph with an expression Tom couldn't quite decipher. Sadness, yes, but something else too. Acceptance, perhaps, or resignation. "3 years ago," she said softly, "the winter fever took him." "I'm sorry," Daniel said, and Tom heard true sympathy in his son's voice. The boy knew what it was to lose someone. He knew the shape of that specific pain. Kate touched his hair, just once, A brief contact, there and gone. Thank you. She began to clear the plates, and Tom moved to help, but his shoulder protested the movement so sharply it made him gasp. Kate pointed to the chair with a look that allowed no argument. You're injured. Sit. Ma'am, we're trouble enough without. You're surviving. There's a difference. Sam was examining the loft ladder, testing its strength with the careful curiosity of a 7-year-old. Benny had found a small, carved bird on the windowsill and was turning it over and over in his hands, with the kind of awe children reserve for truly beautiful things. The bird was exquisite, each feather carved with patient detail. Oak, Tom thought, or maybe maple, polished smooth from handling. Put that back, Tom said, worried his son might break it. It's all right, Kate said from the sink where she was washing up. I made it. A winter project. You carved this? Benny asked, his eyes wide with wonder. He looked from the bird to Kate and back again, as if trying to reconcile the beautiful object with the woman who had made it. Kate nodded. Benny carefully set the bird back in its place, handling it as if it were precious and fragile. His small fingers lingered on it for a moment, before he drew his hand away. Tom looked closer at the windowsill and saw other birds there. 5 in total, each one different. A sparrow, a chickadee, what might have been a lark. Each carved with the same patient detail, the same careful attention. They weren't just crafts. They were art. They were the work of someone who had spent long winters alone, who needed something to occupy her hands and her mind, who needed to create beauty to survive the isolation. By the time it was fully dark, the storm was still raging. If anything, it had intensified. The wind no longer howled, it screamed. Kate announced the sleeping arrangements with the same practical authority she had shown all evening. The boys would have her bed. She would take the loft. Tom would have the chair by the fire. His shoulder needed the warmth to keep it from stiffening. Benny looked at the bed, then at Kate, and his small face took on an expression Tom knew well. The one that meant he was about to ask for something he desperately needed, but wasn't sure he was allowed to have. Will you stay? Benny asked, his voice small. Just till I fall asleep. Tom started to say no, to explain that Mrs. Kate had done enough, that they couldn't impose on her hospitality anymore, that boys their age should be able to sleep without someone watching over them. But Kate was already moving, already understanding what Tom, in his grief, had forgotten. The children who had lost their mother needed more than just food and shelter. They needed the presence of someone who cared. They needed to feel safe. She sat on the edge of the bed without a word. Benny climbed in first, burrowing under the quilts that smelled of cedar. Then Sam, moving slowly, uncertainly. Then Daniel, the oldest, trying to act as though he didn't need this, but climbing into the bed all the same. One by one they settled around her, not quite touching her, but close, drawn to her warmth like cold travelers to a fire. Kate began to sing softly, her voice just above a whisper. An old hymn Tom recognized. One Beth used to sing as she worked around the house, as she tucked the boys into bed, as she lived and breathed and existed in the world. Now Beth was gone, and this stranger was singing her song, and Tom's throat tightened so much he could barely breathe. He turned away, back to the fire. Behind him he heard his son's breathing slow, evening out into the steady rhythm of sleep. Kate's voice continued, quiet and sure, singing his dead wife's songs to his living children. The storm battered the walls, but inside there was peace. Inside there was something Tom hadn't felt in 18 months, something that felt dangerously like home. He lay awake long after the singing stopped, long after Kate had silently climbed to the loft, moving with a practiced quiet in the darkness. His shoulder ached with every beat of his heart. But that wasn't what kept him awake. It wasn't what made sleep impossible. The storm had forced them here. An accident of weather and a broken wagon wheel. But as he watched his sons with Kate, watched them transform back into the boys they used to be, watching them laugh and show curiosity and let their guard down, Tom realized a terrifying truth. The storm hadn't just brought them to shelter, it had brought them home. And in the morning, when the storm passed, he would have to lead them away from it. He would have to take them back to the empty house where Beth's ghost lived in every corner, back to the half-burned meals and the uneasy silences and the slow suffocation of grief that had become their normal. Tom lay by the fire and listened to the wind, and knew that morning would come too soon, that the daylight would show him the path back to his responsibilities, back to his empty home, back to the life he was barely surviving. And he didn't know if he had the strength to walk that path again. He didn't know if he could pull his sons away from the first real warmth they had felt in a year. But what choice did he have? Kate Wells was a stranger, a woman who had shown them kindness because the law of the frontier demanded it. She had done her duty. She had given them shelter from the storm. But that didn't mean she wanted them to stay. It didn't mean she wanted a broken widower and his 3 wounded sons disrupting her carefully ordered, solitary life. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, Tom Brennan wrestled with something larger than the weather. Wrestled with the terrible knowledge that sometimes surviving wasn't enough. That sometimes living meant more than just breathing and eating and going through the motions. That his sons needed more than he was giving them, more than he knew how to give. The morning came both too quickly and not quickly enough. Tom woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon. Kate was already up, had been for who knew how long, moving quietly so as not to wake the boys. The storm had lessened, but not stopped. A gray light filtered through the window, cold and thin. "Morning," Kate said without looking at him. "Coffee?" She poured and handed him the cup. This time their fingers didn't brush. They were both careful. They both knew something had shifted during the night. Some boundary had been crossed, and neither of them was quite sure what to do about it. "How's the shoulder?" "Better, thank you." They sat in an awkward silence. Outside, the wind still howled, but it was a softer sound now. The worst had passed. The knowledge hung between them, unspoken. By afternoon, perhaps by nightfall, the storm would be over. Tom could try to get his wagon to town, have it fixed, and take his sons home before what was left of Christmas was gone completely. "The light in the window means no one travels," Kate said suddenly, her voice cautious. "That's frontier law." "Yes, ma'am." "So you'll stay until the storm is fully past. No arguments." Tom nodded. A part of him, the part that terrified him, was grateful for the excuse, grateful for the law of the frontier that said he had to stay here, in this warm cabin with this capable woman who sang his wife's songs and made his children smile. The boys woke gradually. Benny first, rubbing his eyes, then breaking into a grin when he saw Kate. That smile hit Tom like a blow to the chest. How long had it been since he had seen his youngest son smile like that? Bright and unprompted and full of simple joy. Sam was next, quieter, but watching Kate with the same intensity he watched anything that interested him. The boy was an observer, always had been, taking in the world, trying to figure out how it worked. Now he watched Kate with a focus that spoke of a hunger tough for food, but for something else, something Tom hadn't been able to provide. Daniel was last, older and more guarded, but Tom saw his face soften when Kate handed him a plate of food. He saw the boy's shoulders relax just a fraction, the constant tension he'd carried since Beth's death easing its grip. "Merry Christmas," Kate said. And Tom had forgotten. It was Christmas Day, December 25th, 1878. The second Christmas without Beth. The second Christmas Tom had tried to ignore, tried to get through like any other day. After breakfast, Kate disappeared briefly into her room. She returned with 3 small items wrapped in cloth. She unwrapped them one by one, setting them on the table. Hard candies in a small jar, a precious, expensive orange, and another carved bird, identical to the ones on the windowsill. "I made these for—" She stopped, took a breath, and started again. "Anyway, Merry Christmas, boys." Tom knew what those gifts meant. He knew what they were. An orange in the Montana Territory in December. $3, maybe $4, hauled by wagon from Salt Lake or beyond, carefully packed, carefully transported. Hard candy was a luxury, expensive and rare. And the bird? Hours of work, maybe days, carved with care and attention, made for a child she never had. "Ma'am, we can't," Daniel began, understanding without being told how precious these gifts were. "You can," Kate said, her voice firm. "Please." Benny picked up the bird with reverent hands, holding it like something sacred. Sam clutched the orange as if it were a treasure. Daniel stared at the candy, his throat working. Then Benny reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something small, a river stone, smooth and gray. Tom knew that stone. Beth had given it to Benny before she died. She had pressed it into his small hand and told him it was special, told him to keep it safe. Tom had seen his youngest son touch that stone hundreds of times in the last year, touching it when he was scared, when he was sad, touching it like a talisman against all the darkness in the world. Now, Benny held it out to Kate. "For you." Kate's face crumbled. All her careful control, all her frontier toughness, fell away in an instant. She took the stone with trembling hands, closed her fist around it, and wept openly, tears streaming down her face as Benny patted her hand with his own small one. "It's okay," Benny said in his 5-year-old voice. "It's okay. You can keep her." Kate's arms wrapped around Benny so tightly that for a moment, Tom thought she might never let go. Then Sam came and melted into the hug, and after him, Daniel, abandoning all pretense of being too old for such things. The 3 boys and this woman, a stranger only yesterday, were all tangled together like a family, as if they had always done this, as if they had always belonged to one another. Tom watched from across the room, his heart cracking in his chest. It was a break that ached, but it also felt like a healing, like something frozen was finally beginning to thaw. After a long moment, Kate wiped at her eyes, laughing through her tears. "Well, I haven't cried like that in years." "Mama used to cry sometimes," Benny said, his voice matter of fact. "Papa said it meant her heart was too full." Kate's eyes found Tom's across the room. They held there. Neither of them could look away. Time seemed to stretch the moment, expanding to fill the small cabin. 2 broken people, looking at each other over the heads of 3 motherless boys, Two people who understood loss in a way no one should ever have to. Two people who were surviving instead of living, getting through the days instead of embracing them. "Your papa is a wise man," Kate said softly. Tom heard something in her voice he couldn't name, couldn't let himself name. The afternoon passed in quiet activity. Kate showed Benny how to knead bread, her hands covering his small ones, guiding him in how to fold and press. Tom watched her teach his son with a patience that Beth would have approved of, would have recognized. Sam helped set the table, learning where everything went, how to fold the napkins, small domestic skills that mattered in ways that went beyond the practical. Daniel split kindling without being asked, working through the woodpile with a steady determination. They moved around one another as if they had been doing it for years, as if this cabin had always held 5 people instead of 1, as if family was something you could build in a day and a night, given the right circumstances, the right people, the right amount of need on all sides. Evening fell. Kate made dinner, and the boys ate with better manners than they had shown in months. They wanted to please her. Tom saw that they craved her good opinion in a way they hadn't craved anything except the return of their mother. After dinner, Sam brought Kate a piece of the shattered wagon axle Tom had salvaged from the wreck. "Can you fix things?" the boy asked, looking up at her with solemn eyes. Kate examined the wood, running her fingers along the splintered grain. Tom watched her study it with the same careful attention she had given his shoulder, the same practical assessment she applied to everything. Finally, she looked up, not at Sam, but at Tom. "I can fix most things," she said quietly. "Most things just need time, and the right kind of care." The words hung in the air between them. Tom knew she wasn't talking about wagon axles anymore. He knew she was talking about something bigger, more fragile, something neither of them had the courage to name. "We should stay forever," Sam announced. The words dropped into the cabin like stones in still water, ripples spreading out to touch everything. Daniel said nothing, but his eyes found his father's, pleading, begging, desperate. Tom looked away first. He couldn't meet his oldest son's gaze, couldn't face the hope there. Hope was dangerous. Hope led to disappointment. It was better to expect nothing. It was better to accept what couldn't be changed. But even as he thought it, Tom knew he was lying to himself. He knew something had shifted in this cabin. Something had changed when Benny gave Kate his mother's river stone, when Daniel had let himself be hugged without resistance, when Sam had found the courage to ask questions again. His children were healing here. In one day and one night, they had begun to heal. And Tom was going to take them away from it. Take them back to that empty house on the ranch. Back to burned meals and uncomfortable silences. Back to existing instead of living. What choice did he have? None. No choice at all. That evening, as Kate prepared supper, Tom stood at the window, watching the storm die. The wind had eased. The snow had dwindled to sparse flakes. By morning, the sky would be clear. By morning, he would have no excuse to stay. Behind him, he heard Kate humming softly as she worked. He heard his boys laugh at something Sam said. He heard the sounds of family, of home, of a life being lived instead of endured. And Tom Brennan, 36 years old, widower, father, survivor, felt something crack deep inside his chest. A wall he had built around his heart for the last year and a half. A defense against feeling anything at all. Because feeling meant pain, and pain meant weakness, and weakness meant failing his sons. But here, in this cabin, on Christmas Day, listening to his children laugh, Tom realized he had already failed them. He had been failing them for 18 months. Because surviving wasn't enough. Because children needed more than food and shelter. They needed joy. They needed warmth. They needed what this stranger had given them in a single day. What he had been unable to give them in a year and a half. The storm outside was ending. But inside Tom Brennan, another storm was just beginning. A storm of understanding, of regret, and of a desperate, terrifying hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, if he had the courage, things could be different. They could be better. They could be more than just surviving until death finally came as a relief. But courage was in short supply, and tomorrow would come anyway. Tomorrow always came. The next day dawned clear and bright. The sun glinted on a world of endless white, beautiful and terrible all at once. Beautiful because the storm was over, because they had survived, because the Christmas morning light painted everything in gold. Terrible because the clear weather meant Tom had to try and leave. It meant the law of the frontier no longer held them here. It meant the excuse was gone. Kate felt it too. Tom saw her face shudder slightly over breakfast. He saw her rebuilding walls he hadn't realized were coming down. The easy warmth she had shown the boys yesterday became more cautious, more measured. She was protecting herself. He realized she was bracing for their departure, for the cabin to fall empty again, for the silence to return. Tom should have said something, should have acknowledged what was happening, but the words were stuck in his throat like river stones. What could he say? Thank you for your kindness. We'll be leaving now. Thank you for showing my sons what happiness is. But we have to go back to our home, which feels more like a tomb. The words were impossible. All words were impossible. After breakfast, Tom pulled on his coat and went outside to assess the situation. The cold hit him like a punch, sharp and clean after the cabin's warmth. His breath plumed in the air, crystalline in the bright sun. The snow had drifted deep against the cabin walls in soft curves that looked almost sculpted in the morning light. He walked to where they had left the wagon, following the path they had broken the day before. It felt like a lifetime ago. The wagon lay on its side, just as they'd left it, half buried in a drift. The broken axle was exposed and ugly in the daylight. Tom circled it slowly, examining the damage with the practiced eye he'd gained working for the Northern Pacific Railroad. The brake was clean and complete. Both the wooden core and the iron brace had failed. The wood had been stressed, dried by the summer heat, and then shocked by the winter cold. When it hit the ice, that the whole structure had given way. To fix it properly would take a blacksmith, someone who could forge a new iron sleeve and fit it true. It meant getting the wagon to town, to Smiley's. It meant asking for help. Tom stood in the snow and calculated the distances. 15 miles to town, another 8 to his ranch. Too far to walk with 3 small boys in this cold, even in clear weather. The temperature had to be near 0, maybe below. Without the wind, it was bearable, but only just. To attempt that walk would be to risk frostbite, to risk exposure if the clouds rolled back in. He needed help. He needed a neighbor with a draft horse who could help tow the wagon to town. He needed to get out of here. He needed to get his sons home before he lost his nerve completely. The idea of leaving made his stomach clench and his chest tighten. He shoved the feeling down, buried it deep. Feelings were dangerous. Feelings led to no good. He was standing there, staring at the broken wagon, when he heard the crunch of hooves. Someone was approaching from the east, moving slowly through the deep snow. He turned, his hand instinctively going to his hip, where no gun rested. An old railroad habit, to be wary of strangers. But as the rider drew closer, Tom recognized him. It was Ezra Coleman, a neighbor, and the closest thing Tom had to a friend these days. Ezra sat tall in the saddle despite his 55 years, his face weathered, a look of relief on it. "Brennan, figured you were headed to town for supplies. When the storm hit, Martha and I got to worrying." Tom explained about the wagon, the axle, about Kate's cabin, and the shelter they had found. Ezra listened, nodding. Then he dismounted to inspect the damage for himself. He let out a low whistle when he saw the break. "That's a job for a smith, for sure," Ezra said, running a hand over the splintered wood. "You'll need a new axle forged, not just patched. But I can help you get it to town. Got my draft horse at home. We can rig something up, drag it in. It'll likely take the best part of the day. But it's doable." "I'd be mighty grateful," Tom said. Ezra Coleman had been a good neighbor this past year and a half. He never pushed, never pried, but he was always there when needed. Always willing to lend a hand, or an ear, or just quiet company. "Ready to go now, if you are," Ezra said, glancing at the sky. "Weather's holding. Best to take advantage while we can." Tom looked back at the cabin, a curl of smoke rising from its chimney. His sons were in there, probably still sitting at the table, probably still basking in the warm glow of Kate's attention, probably happy in a way they hadn't been in 18 months. "Give me an hour," Tom said, his voice heavier than he intended. Ezra's shrewd eyes studied him for a moment. The old rancher missed little. Tom knew that. He missed little and said less, but he understood a great deal. "Take all the time you need," Ezra said quietly. "I'll go get things ready for the wagon." Tom walked back to the cabin, each step heavier than the last. The sun was warm on his face, but he felt cold inside. Cold and heavy and trapped by circumstances he couldn't change. He was a father. He had responsibilities. He had a ranch to run, cattle to see to, a life to maintain. He couldn't just stay here, in this warm cabin, with this strange woman who made his son smile. That wasn't how the world worked. It wasn't how life worked. Inside, Kate was clearing the breakfast dishes. The boys sat in silence, sensing that something was wrong. Children always knew, Tom thought. They always felt the shift in an adult's mood, the tension in the air before the storm. "Neighbors outside," Tom said, his voice too harsh, his own pain making him cruel. "He can help us get the wagon to town." Benny's face crumpled like paper in a fist. Sam stared down at his hands, his shoulders curling inward. Daniel stood abruptly, walked to the window, and turned his back on the room. At 10 years old, he was already learning to hide his emotions, to swallow his pain, to be the strong one. "We're leaving." Benny's voice was a small, broken thing. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. "Yes." "No." Benny shook his head, his small hands clenched into fists. "I don't want to, Benny. We have to. We have our own home. We can't just stay here." "Why not?" Sam's voice, usually so quiet, frayed with emotion. "Why can't we stay? She needs us. We need her." Tom felt the words like knife thrusts, felt them slice through all his carefully built defenses, all his resolve to do the responsible thing, the right thing, the thing that made sense. Boys, pack your things, he said, knowing the words were wrong even as he spoke them. We're leaving in an hour. She's not your mother, Tom added, and immediately regretted it. The words hung in the air, brutal and true and wrong all at once. Brutal because they hurt. True because Beth was dead and no one could ever replace her. And wrong because in that moment, in that warm cabin, it felt like the biggest lie he had ever told. Wrong because that wasn't the question. It had never been the question. It wasn't what anyone was asking. Benny ran to Kate, sobbing. She embraced him without a second's hesitation, holding him tight against her chest. Over his head, her eyes met Tom's. Everything he needed to know was in that look. Everything he had been trying not to see, not to acknowledge, not to hope for. She wanted them to stay, but she wouldn't ask. Couldn't ask. Too much pride. Too many years spent learning not to hope for things her body couldn't give her. Too much of that frontier hardness that said you took what life dealt you, and you didn't complain, didn't beg, didn't make yourself vulnerable by wanting things that could not pass so. Kate kissed Benny's head and set him gently on the floor. Her voice was steady when she spoke, but Tom saw the effort it cost her. He saw the iron control that kept her from trembling. Help your brothers pack. They moved like ghosts, like sleepwalkers in someone else's nightmare. Kate wrapped food for them with steady, efficient hands. Bread, cheese, dried meat, practical supplies for the journey. Her face was a mask, carefully neutral, professional. The face of someone doing their duty without complaint or emotion. A knock at the door. Ezra, patient and kind. Whenever you're ready, Brennan. The boys climbed into the bed of the wagon Ezra had prepared. No one spoke. The silence was so thick you could choke on it. Even Ezra, normally full of frontier stories and crude jokes, was quiet. He felt something in the air, something heavy and wrong that made words impossible. Kate stood in the doorway, a shawl wrapped around her against the cold. She handed Tom the parcel of food. Their fingers brushed. They both recoiled as if from a flame. Your Beth loved you very much, Kate whispered, so softly Ezra couldn't hear. They're good boys. Tom heard the goodbye in her voice. He heard her releasing them, sending them back to their lives. She thought he didn't want this. Didn't want her. She thought he was leaving because he had to, not because he'd chosen to. She thought he had done his duty and nothing more. Thank you, Tom managed to say. The words were inadequate, cowardly, everything he despised, but they were all he had. Kate nodded once, stepped back inside and closed the door. The wagon began to move, the snow crunching under the wheels and hooves. Ezra rode ahead on his horse, Tom driving the damaged wagon that swayed and groaned with every turn. Behind him in the wagon bed, his sons sat in miserable silence. They had gone maybe a quarter of a mile when Benny spoke, shattering the terrible quiet. His voice was thick with tears, but the words were clear. Daddy, she's going to be alone again. Tom's hand trembled on the reins. Everything was wrong. The sun was too bright, searing his eyes. The snow was too white, reflecting the light until he could barely see. The wagon groaned with every turn, and each sound was an accusation. Each sound said, coward, said, failure, said, fool. Benny was crying quietly, broken little sobs that tore at Tom's heart. Sam stared at his hands, his shoulders shaking with held-in emotion. Daniel sat in the back with his face turned away, but Tom could see the rigid set of his shoulders, could feel the anger and disappointment radiating off his eldest son. Tom's throat was tight. His vision kept blurring, and he told himself it was the bright sun glaring off the snow. He told himself it wasn't tears. Men didn't cry. Fathers didn't fall apart. You did what had to be done and you didn't complain. And you kept moving forward because that's what survival demanded. 18 months of holding it all together. 18 months of being strong for his boys, of keeping the farm running, of putting one foot in front of the other, even when every step felt impossible. And now it was all unraveling, a quarter of a mile too late. She smells like Mama used to, Benny said suddenly, his voice firmer now despite the tears. But she's not Mama, she's Kate, and we need her. Something inside Tom broke. All the grief, all the fear, all the carefully constructed walls. Everything he had built to protect himself, to protect his sons, to survive in a world that had taken Beth and left him alone with 3 small boys and no idea how to raise them. It all shattered like ice under a spring sun. Beth was gone. He had been keeping his sons in amber, preserving them like specimens in a jar, afraid to let life back in, afraid to move on because moving on meant leaving Beth behind, dishonoring her memory, meant admitting she was truly gone and never coming back. But Kate wasn't a replacement. Kate was something else entirely. Kate was a woman alone in that cabin because her body couldn't give her children. Kate was someone who carved birds through long winters to keep the loneliness at bay. Kate was someone who had just given his 3 boys something he couldn't. She'd given them hope, given them joy, given them a glimpse of what life could be instead of what it had become. And he was driving away from it, taking them back to that tomb of a farmhouse, back to burnt meals and suffocating silence, pulling them away from the first real warmth they had felt in a year and a half. Because he was a coward, because he was afraid, because to accept happiness meant risking loss all over again. And he couldn't survive losing someone else he loved. Tom pulled the wagon to a halt. Ezra looked back, confused. "Brennan, something wrong?" "Everything," Tom said, his voice raw. "Everything is wrong." "Dad?" Daniel's voice cracked with sudden, desperate hope. Tom turned on the seat to face his sons. All 3 of them were watching him, their expressions a mixture of hope and confusion and desperate need. His boys, Beth's boys, children who deserved more than a father, too broken to let them be happy. "If I went back," Tom said, his voice rough with emotion he could no longer contain. "If I went back and I asked her, would you want to stay?" 3 voices screamed, "Yes!" so loud that Ezra's horse shied, dancing sideways in the snow. Ezra looked from them to Tom, a slow understanding dawning on his weathered face. A smile spread across his lips, the kind of smile that said he'd been waiting for this, that he'd known before Tom did. "Well, don't just sit there, son," Ezra said, still grinning. "Some things don't keep. Some things you lose if you don't grab hold when you get the chance." Turning the wagon was hard in the deep snow. The horses balked, confused by the change of direction. Ezra helped coax them around, patient and encouraging. Every second felt like an hour. Every moment of delay felt like a disaster waiting to happen. What if she didn't want them? What if he'd read it all wrong? What if he got there and she sent them away? Finally, they were heading back. The homestead was visible in the distance, smoke still curling from the chimney. Kate was in there alone again, returning to the life she'd had before they arrived, returning to her winter carving projects, her wooden birds, and the desperate, silent loneliness. "You go on," Ezra said. "I'll wait here with the boys." "No," Daniel said firmly. "We're going." Tom looked at his oldest son and saw a determination there. He saw a boy who had grown up too fast, but who still knew what mattered, still knew that some moments needed witnesses, needed family, needed everyone present. "All right," Tom said. "All of us." So they went, back toward the cabin, hearts pounding, hope and terror warring in Tom's chest. He had no plan, no prepared words, just a desperate need, and the certainty that driving away had been wrong, that his sons deserved better, that Kate deserved better, that maybe, just maybe, if he was brave enough, they could all have something better. Inside the cabin, Kate moved mechanically, wiping the table though it was already clean, washing dishes that were already spotless. Her hands were shaking, but she kept them moving. Work was survival. Work was how you got through. Work was what you did when your heart was broken, and you couldn't let yourself fall apart. Because falling apart meant admitting how desperately you wanted something you could not have. The coffee mugs sat in the drying rack. The boys had left them half full, too heartsick to finish. She poured out the cold coffee, scrubbed the mugs clean, but she could still see the faint smudges of their small hands on the ceramic, still remember the weight of Benny in her lap, still feel the ghost of Daniel's awkward hug. She had known them for 3 days. 3 days, and somehow in those 3 days, they had become everything. They had filled the cabin with noise and warmth and life. They had made her remember what it was like to be needed, to be wanted, to matter to someone. Now they were gone and the silence was louder than it had ever been. Worse than before because now she knew what she was missing. Before she had only imagined a family. Now she'd had one for a brief, shining moment and lost it. And the loss was unbearable. Kate heard the sound of a wagon outside, pulling to a stop. Her hands, dripping with soapy water, froze in the basin. They forgot something, she told herself. That's all it was. They forgot something and came back for it. And then they would leave again, and she would have to watch them go twice. She didn't think she could survive it, but she went to the door anyway. She pulled it open and saw the wagon, saw Tom climbing down, walking toward her with an expression on his face she couldn't decipher. She saw the boys in the wagon behind him, 3 small faces staring with desperate hope. Tom stopped a few feet away. The snow lay between them, bright and clean and cold. His face was open in a way she had never seen it. Vulnerable, terrified, determined. "Would you consider," he began, and his voice broke. He couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't find the words for what he was asking. Kate didn't need him to. She didn't need words for what passed between them in that moment. She didn't need an explanation or a justification or anything at all except for the desperate hope in his eyes, in his son's eyes, in the very air between them. "Yes," she said. The word hung in the cold air, clear and certain and irrevocable. Tom stared at her as if he'd misheard, as if his mind couldn't process what she'd said. "I didn't even ask. I didn't say what." "Yes," Kate said again, louder this time, more certain. "Whatever you're asking, whatever you're offering, whatever this is, yes." Behind Tom, the wagon exploded. 3 boys tumbled out, shouting and laughing and crying all at once. They scrambled through the knee-deep snow, running for Kate as if she were home. as if she were everything they had been looking for. They hit her all at once, nearly knocking her over. Benny wrapped his arms around her waist. Sam grabbed her hand. Daniel, trying to maintain some dignity, just stood close enough to touch her. Kate sank to her knees in the snow, gathered all three of them into her arms, and sobbed. They weren't tears of grief, but of release. Something that had been locked inside her for years, for all the winters she had spent alone, for all the carved birds, for all the children she would never have. It all came pouring out in that moment, in the arms of three boys who were not hers by blood, but were hers in every way that mattered. Tom stood to the side, watching his family form, watching his sons with this woman, watching Kate hold them as if they were precious, as if they were gifts, as if they were everything she had ever wanted. And he knew with absolute certainty that walking away from this would have been the greatest mistake of his life. Worse than any mistake he had ever made. Worse than all the burnt meals and awkward silences and lonely nights combined. Inside, Kate managed a watery laugh before they all froze. They tumbled into the cabin, bringing cold air and snow and noise. So much noise. Kate's quiet cabin had never held so much life, had never been so loud, so chaotic, so perfectly imperfect. Ezra appeared at the door, still smiling. "Reckon you won't be needing that ride into town after all." "Not today," Tom said. "Good man." Ezra tipped his hat to Kate. "Ma'am, you've got yourself a fine family here." "I know," Kate said softly, and the wonder in her voice made Tom's throat tighten. After Ezra had gone, they sat around the table. The boys were vibrating with energy, too excited to sit still. But there were practical matters to discuss, reality to face, plans to be made. "Where will we live?" Kate asked, her voice cautious. "This place is too small for five." Tom had thought about that on the ride back. He'd done the sums, run the numbers. "My farm is bigger, closer to town. Better for the boys, with better grazing land. We can make this work." When Kate's voice cracked on the word marry, Tom took a deep breath. This was it. This was the leap, the moment where everything would either change or fall apart. As soon as the pastor can make it, as soon as the roads are fully cleared, unless, he hesitated. "Unless you need more time, to be sure." Kate reached across the table and took his hand. It was the first time they had truly touched, truly allowed themselves the contact. Her fingers were warm, calloused from her work, strong, real. "I'm sure," she said. Benny clambered into Kate's lap without asking. It was his privilege now, his to claim. Sam leaned against her shoulder. Daniel watched with a fierce satisfaction, as if he had single-handedly willed this miracle into existence. "Can I call you Mama?" Benny asked, his voice small but hopeful. Tears welled in Kate's eyes again. She cupped his face in her hands, the rough hands of a frontier woman, hands that had carved birds, tended to wounds, and survived 3 years alone. "It would be my honor," she whispered. Later, after the boys were busy with Kate's collection of carved birds, an entire flock, the product of long, solitary winters, Tom and Kate stood alone by the fire. They were in a room full of people, yet they were the only two in it, trying to grasp what they had just agreed to, trying to believe it was real. "I need to show you something," Kate said softly. She led him to her bedroom, to a small hope chest at the foot of her bed. With hands that trembled slightly, She opened it. Inside lay tiny clothes, infant gowns, small shirts, knitted blankets, all carefully folded and preserved. Years of hope, of preparing, of believing that one day she would have children to wear these clothes. And then years of accepting it would not happen, yet being unable to give them away, unable to discard the physical evidence of dreams that had died. I made these, Kate whispered. Years ago. Before I accepted I wouldn't have children. I couldn't part with them. I just couldn't. Tom reached out and touched a small gown, imagining Kate's hand stitching it, imagining the hope she'd poured into every seam, the ache as that hope slowly withered. Keep them, he said, his voice thick, for grandchildren. Kate looked at him, startled. Grandchildren? He repeated, a small smile touching his lips. You're still young, and the boys will grow fast. You'll have grandchildren, Kate. A house full of them, if Benny has any say in it. These clothes will be worn, just not in the way you originally planned. Kate laughed, then cried, then laughed again. Tom pulled her close, careful of her recovering shoulder. She fit against him as if she were made for that space, as if all the lonely years had been a preparation for this one impossible, improbable, perfect moment. I don't even know your middle name, Kate said against his chest. Thomas James Brennan, he said. I was an engineer for the Northern Pacific Railroad before I took up ranching. Catherine Rose Collins, she replied. I was a nurse in Philadelphia before I came west. Tom pulled back to look at her. You studied medicine? Kate nodded. 3 years at Pennsylvania Hospital. It's where I met my husband. He was a pharmacist. We came west so he could open a shop in Helena, but he took ill our first winter. I cared for him for 2 years before he passed. It all clicked into place for Tom now. The confident way she'd moved around his injury, her knowledge of poultices, her ability to assess a medical situation in an instant. Kate Wells wasn't just a survivor. She was a professional. She had been trained to heal, had spent years learning how to save lives, and then she had spent 3 more years alone in a cabin, those skills lying dormant, except for the occasional neighbor in need. What a waste, Tom thought. What a terrible waste of skill, of knowledge, of care. Kate should have been in a town, helping people, putting all that training to use. But the frontier had trapped her here, in this isolated cabin, alone with her carved birds and her unfulfilled dreams. Well, that was about to change. At his ranch, they would be closer to town. Kate could help their neighbors. She could use her skills. She could be the person she was trained to be, more than just a lonely widow carving the years away in wood. That night, after the boys were in bed, exhausted from the day's emotion and excitement, Tom and Kate sat by the fire. They didn't touch, but sat close, learning each other in the way new couples do, in silence and glances, in the slow building of comfort. Do you ever wonder, Kate asked quietly, if it was the storm that brought you to me, or me to you? Tom considered it. Outside, the stars blazed in the clear night sky. The same stars that had shone on Christmas Eve, but now they seemed warmer, kinder, less distant. Both, he said at last. God knew we all needed finding. Benny asked me today if I thought God made the storm happen just so we could meet, Kate said, leaning her head on his shoulder. I told him that maybe, sometimes, the worst things lead to the best things, if you're just brave enough to see it. Smart woman, smart boy. They sat in silence for a time, watching the flames dance. Tom thought of Beth, of the letter she had left him, of how she had known, somehow, that he would need permission to move on, that he would torture himself with guilt if she didn't explicitly release him from their vows. Beth had always been wise, had always seen him more clearly than he saw himself, and she had loved him enough to set him free, to tell him to live, to love again, to give their sons the family they needed, even if it meant bringing someone new into the space she had once occupied. "I'm not trying to replace her," Kate said suddenly, as if reading his mind. "I couldn't, even if I wanted to." "You aren't replacing her," Tom said carefully. "You're what comes next, what she would have wanted for us, for me." From upstairs, Benny cried out in his sleep. "Kate." Catherine Rose was up in an instant. Tom heard her soft voice, heard Benny settle back into a peaceful quiet. When she returned, she was holding the smooth river stone Benny had given her. She kept it in her pocket, Tom realized. She kept it close. "Do you know what he told me yesterday?" Kate asked. "What?" "He said, 'Mama, I'm glad the storm came.' I asked him why. He said, 'Because now you're not alone anymore, and neither are we.'" A lump formed in Tom's throat. He pulled Kate closer, and they sat in silence, watching the stars wheel across the sky through the window. A lamp lit in the window. No more loneliness. No more surviving. Welcome, home, family. But Tom knew challenges were waiting. Tomorrow would bring reality. It would bring the need to explain to the community, to face questions and judgments, to navigate the complicated path from strangers to family. It would bring the practical difficulties of blending two lives, two households, two sets of grief and hope and desperate need. But tonight, they had each other. They had 3 boys sleeping peacefully for the first time in 18 months. They had hope where before there had only been survival. They had the beginning of something that felt like healing. And for tonight, that was enough. For tonight, that was everything. 3 weeks. That's how long Tom tried to make it work back at the ranch. 3 weeks of stepping back into the life they had left behind, of trying to pretend nothing had changed, of trying to convince himself that the warmth of Kate's cabin had been an illusion, a moment out of time that couldn't survive the harsh reality of ordinary days. He was wrong. The first week was the hardest. The ranch house felt colder than Tom remembered, and emptier. Beth's things were still everywhere, exactly as he had left them on Christmas Eve. Her apron on the hook by the stove, her sewing basket beside the chair where she used to sit in the evenings, the dried flowers she had picked last summer, now brittle and faded, still in a vase on the windowsill. Tom had kept it all like a shrine. He had preserved everything as if Beth might walk through the door at any moment and need her apron, or want to finish the mending she'd left undone. For 18 months, that preservation had felt like love, like honoring her memory. Now it felt like a prison. It felt like a refusal to accept reality, like keeping his sons trapped in the moment of their loss, instead of letting them live. The boys felt it too. Daniel grew quiet and withdrawn, doing his chores without being asked, but with no joy in the work. He was just going through the motions, surviving each day. Sam retreated into himself, back into the terrible silence he had fallen into before Christmas. And Benny cried in the night, quiet, gulping sobs Tom could hear through the thin walls, sounds that broke his heart, but that he didn't know how to stop. Tom burned supper that first night back. The potatoes were charred on the bottom and raw in the middle. The boys ate without a word. They had learned not to complain. But Tom saw Daniel pushing the food around his plate. He saw Sam take tiny bites and swallow, as if each one were an effort. He saw Benny's eyes fill with tears the boy tried desperately to hide. They were all thinking of Kate's stew, of food made with care, of meals that didn't taste of ash and failure. The second week, it got worse. A cold snap hit, the temperature dropping to 20 below. The kind of cold that ached in your lungs, that froze the water in the well, that turned simple chores like feeding the livestock into battles for survival. Tom worked from before dawn until after dark, trying to keep the animals alive, trying to keep the pipes from freezing, trying to hold everything together through sheer force of will. Daniel helped without being asked, but Tom saw the exhaustion etched on his son's face. He saw a 10-year-old boy trying to do a man's work, trying to carry burdens no child should have to bear. One afternoon, while they were working on a frozen water line, Daniel looked up at him, his eyes too old, too tired, too empty. "Are we ever going to be happy again, Pa?" The question hit Tom like a punch to the gut. He wanted to say yes. He wanted to promise his son that happiness was coming, that things would get better, but the words stuck in his throat because he didn't know if they were true. He didn't know if happiness was possible in this house of ghosts, in this life of survival, in an existence that felt more like a slow death than a life. "I don't know, son," Tom said finally, and he hated himself for the honesty. He hated that he didn't have better answers, that he wasn't the father his boys needed. In the third week, Daniel broke. It was a Tuesday night, another burnt supper. Tom had been distracted, thinking about the cattle, about money, about how he was going to afford to replace the fence come spring. Thinking about anything but the pot on the stove. The beans had scorched, filling the house with an acrid smoke. Daniel shot up from the table so fast his chair crashed backward. "You took us away from her!" Tom turned from the stove, stunned. Daniel never raised his voice, never showed his anger, never challenged his authority. "Danny, sit down, we've talked about this." "No, we haven't. You decided. You just decided we had to leave and we left and now we're here and everything is awful and you won't even admit it." "Daniel James Brennan, you watch your tone." "Why? What does it matter? Nothing matters. Mama's dead, and you're half dead, and Sam won't talk, and Benny cries every single night. And we could have been with Kate, but you were too scared." The words hung in the smoky air. Too scared. His 10-year-old son had seen right through him, had named the truth Tom couldn't even admit to himself. "She's not your mother," Tom said, his voice hard and defensive. "Wrong. Mama's dead," Daniel shouted, and his voice cracked on the word, breaking completely. "Mama's dead, and you're keeping us dead with her, living in a tomb. She wouldn't want this, Pa. She wouldn't want us to be like this." Daniel bolted for the stairs to the loft, his feet pounding on the wooden steps. Tom heard the creak of his son's bed, heard muffled, heartbroken sobs. Sam and Benny sat at the table in stunned silence, their eyes wide with shock. They had never heard Daniel yell before. They had never seen their big brother fall apart. Tom sank heavily into his chair, his head in his hands. His shoulder ached. It had never healed right. But that pain was nothing compared to the one in his chest. The knowledge that his son was right, that he was keeping them all trapped in grief because he was too afraid to move on, too afraid to dishonor Beth's memory, too afraid to accept that happiness might be possible again. That night, After he'd put Sam and Benny to bed, Tom climbed the ladder to the loft. Daniel was still awake. Tom knew from the boy's breathing, lying there in the dark, staring at the ceiling. "Danny, Tom said softly. "Sorry," the boy whispered. "Don't be. You were right." Daniel turned to look at his father. Even in the dim light of the lantern Tom carried, he could see the surprise on his son's face. Tom sat on the edge of the narrow bed. "Your mother loved us so much that even as she was dying, she was thinking about what we would need. She left me a letter, telling me to let love in again. She said not to keep you boys trapped in grief, and I've been doing just that. Keeping us all trapped, because I'm afraid." Afraid of what? Afraid of forgetting her. Afraid that moving on means leaving her behind. Afraid that being happy again means I didn't love her enough the first time. Daniel sat up, his young face serious in the lamplight. "But Kate isn't trying to make us forget Mom. She's different. She's Kate. We had Mom. We can love them both. Our hearts are big enough. Mom would want us to be happy. She'd want us to have Kate." Tom pulled his son into a fierce hug, holding on tight. "When did you get so wise?" "I've been thinking about it a lot," Daniel said, his voice muffled against his father's shoulder. "Every night since we left, I think about how it felt at Kate's, how different it was. Not better than when Mom was alive, just different. Like we could breathe again. Like it was okay to be sad, but it was also okay to be happy. And Dad, I miss that. I miss feeling like it's okay to be happy." The next morning, Tom went to check his cattle and found one of the cows had gotten tangled in some old barbed wire during the night. The animal was badly hurt, bleeding from several deep gashes. Tom worked for an hour to free her, cutting himself in the process, his hands torn and bloody by the time he was done. The cow limped away, but Tom thought she'd survive if infection didn't set in. He stood there in the snow, hands bleeding, exhausted and cold, and at the very end of his rope. And he thought of Kate, of her medical training, her gentle competence, the way she had treated his shoulder on Christmas Eve. If Kate were here, she would know what to do with these cuts. She would clean them properly, know which herbs or salves to use, would handle it all with quiet efficiency. But Kate wasn't here. Kate was 15 miles away, alone in her cabin, carving birds to survive the winter. And Tom was here, bleeding and hurt, trying to survive on his own when he didn't have to be, when he had chosen this isolation out of fear and a stubborn, misplaced sense of honor. When Tom got back to the house, cold and aching, he found Sam standing at the window. The boy had been there for who knows how long, just staring west, toward where Kate's homestead lay. Too far to see, but close enough to wish for. "Sam," Tom said gently. "You all right, son?" Sam didn't turn. He didn't answer. The silence that had claimed him after they'd left Kate's had only deepened, grown more complete. The boy who had started talking again in Kate's cabin, who had asked questions and laughed and engaged with the world, had sealed himself away. Tom tried to remember the last time Sam had spoken a word. That afternoon, Tom made a decision. He saddled his horse and rode over to Ezra Coleman's ranch. He found the older man in the barn, mending a harness. Ezra looked up, took one look at Tom's face and set his work aside. "What happened?" Tom told him everything. About the 3 weeks of struggle. About Daniel's outburst. About Sam's silence. about his own dawning realization that he was failing his sons by trying to preserve a past that was gone instead of building a future that could be. Ezra listened without interruption. When Tom finally fell silent, the old man nodded slowly. So, what are you going to do about it? I don't know, that's why I'm here. I need advice. You need advice? Ezra raised an eyebrow. Tom Brennan, you're one of the smartest men I know when it comes to engineering, building, and solving problems. But when it comes to your own heart, you're as dumb as a post. Tom almost smiled, in spite of it all. Tell me something I don't know. 3 days before the fourth night of the third week, something changed. Tom went to bed exhausted, his shoulders aching after 12 hours of winter ranch work. He fell asleep quickly, into the dreamless, heavy sleep of pure exhaustion. He woke with a prickling sense that something was wrong. It wasn't a sound, but the absence of one. That specific, hollow silence that meant something was missing where it should be. Tom sat up, his heart already pounding. Something was wrong. He could feel it in his bones, in the cold air, in the quality of the darkness. He lit a candle and climbed the ladder to the loft. Daniel and Sam were asleep, bundled in heavy quilts. Benny's bed was empty, the covers thrown carelessly back. And there, on the wooden floor, were small, wet footprints. Melted snow led from the bed to the ladder and down toward the main room door. Tom's blood ran cold. He scrambled down the ladder, nearly falling in his haste, pulled on his boots, threw on his coat, and grabbed a lantern. He wrenched the door open to the bitter cold and saw them. Small, child-sized footprints in the fresh snow, leading away from the house, heading west. Toward Kate's homestead, 15 miles away. Benny had left hours ago. Tom knew it by the way the wind had already begun to drift snow over the tracks. 3 hours, maybe 4, and the temperature had plummeted. The thermometer by the door read 12 degrees below zero. The wind chill made it worse. So much worse. A 5-year-old boy, alone in the Montana winter dark, walking toward something 15 miles away that he could never hope to reach. He would freeze to death trying. He was probably frozen already. Tom couldn't breathe, couldn't think. A terror, the likes of which he hadn't felt since Beth died, seized him. He had failed his son. His grief, his cowardice, his stubborn refusal of happiness had driven his youngest child out into the killing cold. He shook Daniel awake with trembling hands. Benny's gone. He's walking to Kate's. I'm going after him. You stay here with Sam. Keep the fire going. Don't leave this house for any reason. Do you understand? Daniel's face went white. He'll freeze. I know. That's why I'm going now. Lock the door after me. Don't open it for anyone but me or Ezra. Tom saddled his horse in record time, his hands fumbling with the frozen buckles. Every second mattered. Every moment of delay could be the difference between finding Benny alive or finding his small, frozen body in a snowdrift. He rode hard into the darkness, following the wandering trail. The footprints told a story that made Tom's heart ache with anguish. At first, they were determined, purposeful. Benny walking with the 5-year-old confidence of a boy, set on his goal. But after a mile, they began to falter, to weave slightly. The child was getting tired, cold, beginning to lose his bearings. 2 miles. 3. The tracks grew more erratic. Benny had fallen several times. Tom could see the small, body-shaped impressions in the snow. Each time the boy had gotten up, kept walking, kept moving west toward Kate, toward the woman he loved, the woman who needed him. 4 miles. Tom was shouting now, screaming his son's name into the dark. "Benny! Benny! Where are you?" Nothing. Only the wind in the darkness and the terrible certainty that he was too late, that his son was already gone, that his cowardice had killed his child. 6 miles. The tracks were barely visible now, scoured by the blowing snow. Benny had been falling more often, getting up more slowly. Hypothermia would be setting in. Confusion, disorientation. The deadly cold that makes you think you're warm, makes you want to lie down and sleep. Tom almost missed him, almost rode right past in the dark, but something made him glance to the right, toward a small drift of snow beside a pine tree. And there, almost invisible, a patch of dark fabric against the white snow. Tom was off the horse before it stopped moving, dropping to his knees beside the small form. "Benny? Benny, no, please, no!" His son was curled in the snow as if asleep. His lips were blue, his face a deathly white, his body racked with the violent shivers that meant he was still alive, still fighting, but not for much longer. His coat was open, one mitten gone, classic signs of severe hypothermia, the paradoxical undressing that comes just before the end. Tom tore off his own coat, wrapped Benny in it, pulled his son against his chest, feeling the shocking cold of the little body. Too cold. Dangerously cold. He got him onto the horse, mounted behind him, held on tight, and rode. Not for home. Home was 2 miles back. Ezra's ranch was only 3 miles to the southeast. 3 miles Tom covered at a dead gallop, risking his horse to save his son. He hammered on Ezra's door, the horse heaving beneath him, Benny limp in his arms. Ezra opened it in his nightshirt, took one look, and yelled for Martha. Martha Coleman moved with practiced efficiency. A nurse during the war, she had seen frostbite and hypothermia before. She stripped Benny of his frozen clothes, wrapped him in warm blankets from her own bed, and laid him near the hearth, but not too near. She began to gently, carefully, rub his hands and feet, trying to bring the warmth back without causing more damage. Tom sat beside his son, holding Benny's small hand, and wept. Racking sobs he couldn't control, couldn't stop. His boy, his baby, nearly dead because Tom had been too much of a coward to choose love over fear. An hour passed, the longest hour of Tom's life. Slowly, impossibly, color began to return to Benny's face. The violent shivers subsided, his breathing evened out. When Benny's eyes finally fluttered open, Tom leaned over him, tears still tracking down his face. "Benny, thank God. Thank God you're alive." Benny looked up at his father with eyes that were too old, too knowing, too wise for a 5-year-old. "I was going to Kate," he whispered, his voice a raw rasp. "She's alone, Pa. Someone has to be with her. She's dying too, just slower, from being lonely." The words hit Tom like bullets. Every one of them found its mark, tore through his defenses, and shattered the last of his carefully constructed walls. "You almost died," Tom said, his voice thick. "But Kate's dying too," Benny repeated with perfect 5-year-old logic. "Just slower, and we could save her. We could all save each other. But you won't let us." Tom gathered his son close, holding him gently, carefully, afraid he might break. "You're right," he whispered. You're right about all of it. And I'm sorry. I am so sorry. Ezra stood in the doorway, his arms crossed. That boy has more courage in his little finger than most men have in their whole bodies. He was willing to die to save someone he loves. The question is, Tom, are you willing to live for the same reason? Tom looked at his youngest son, the child who had nearly frozen to death trying to fix what his father had broken. He looked at Ezra, the friend who had been patient with his grief, but whose patience had run out. He looked at Martha, who had saved Benny's life and now watched Tom with quiet expectation. Yes, Tom said. Yes, I am. Then what are you waiting for? Ezra asked. Sun's up in 3 hours. Soon as the boy's strong enough, you take him home. You talk to Daniel and Sam. And then the 4 of you ride to Kate's. You don't go alone this time. You take your sons, because they're a part of this. They chose her as much as you did. And you ask for her hand, proper. You ask her like a man who knows what he wants and isn't afraid to fight for it. Tom nodded. He couldn't speak past the lump in his throat. But he nodded. Benny drifted off to sleep on his father's chest. Finally warm. Finally safe. And Tom sat there in Ezra Coleman's house and made a promise. To Beth. To his sons. To himself. And to Kate. Waiting alone in her cabin. He promised he would be brave. He would choose love over fear. He would choose to live, not just survive. When morning came, the 4 of them would ride to Kate's, and Tom would ask the question he should have asked 3 weeks ago. He would beg if he had to. He would grovel. He would do whatever it took, because his 5-year-old son was willing to die for love, and Tom Brennan was finally going to learn how to live for it. That woman saved your lives, Ezra said, his voice low and sharp. She took you in, cared for your sons, showed everyone what happiness could look like. And you walked away because you were scared. Now you're back, miserable. Your sons are miserable. And she's alone in that cabin, miserable. And you're asking me what to do. It's not that simple, Ezra. It is exactly that simple. Go back there. Apologize. Propose to her properly. Court her in front of the whole town so no one can say it's just convenience or desperation. Show her and everyone else that you're choosing her, that she matters, that this is real. And if she says no, at least you tried. At least you were brave enough to ask. Ezra leaned closer. But Tom, that woman looked at you and your sons like you hung the moon. She's not going to say no. She's probably sitting in that cabin right now, wondering why you haven't come back, wondering what she did wrong. Women always think it's their fault, always think they weren't good enough, or pretty enough, or whatever enough. You need to go tell her she is enough, that she's everything. Tom rode home as the sun bled across the horizon, Ezra's words echoing in his head. That night, sleep wouldn't come. He lay awake, picturing Kate alone in her cabin, thinking about how they'd all come alive in her house only to slowly die back at the ranch. He thought of Beth's letter, her plea for him to let love in again. He'd been so focused on honoring Beth's memory that he'd forgotten to honor her wishes. She'd asked him to live, asked him to let his children have full lives. And he had done the opposite, keeping them all half alive, trapped in grief, refusing to move on. The next morning, Tom made breakfast without burning a thing. A small victory, but it felt significant. The boys expressed their surprise at finding food that was actually edible. They ate in silence, but Tom saw Daniel watching him, a cautious hope in his face. "Boys," Tom said when breakfast was done, I need to tell you something. They looked at him, three pairs of eyes, waiting, hoping, afraid to hope. I was wrong, Tom said. About a lot of things. About keeping your mother's things as if she were coming back. About thinking moving on meant forgetting her. About leaving Kate's house when we should have stayed. Benny's eyes went wide. Sam's head shot up, and for the first time in days, Tom saw real attention in him. Daniel leaned forward, his body tense. I'm going to fix it, Tom said. I'm going back to Kate's. I'm going to apologize, and I'm going to ask her properly. Ask if she'll let me court her. Ask if, maybe if she's willing, she might consider becoming part of our family. Really? Benny asked, his voice a near whisper. Really, son. But I need to know one thing first. If I do this, if I ask her and she says yes, are you all on board? Because this isn't just about me. It's about all of us. It's about building a family. And I won't do it unless you're sure. Yes! Benny shouted, scrambling up from his chair. Yes! 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 Sam's voice, rusty from disuse but clear, said, Please, Pa. Please go get her. Daniel just nodded, but his eyes were shining with tears and relief. All right then, Tom said, feeling something loosen in his chest, something that had been tight and aching for weeks, for months, for the entire 18 months since Beth died. I'll go tomorrow. I'll talk to her. And boys, I promise you, I'm going to do this right. I'm going to court her properly. I'll show her she's important. I'll make sure she knows this is real, that we're choosing her, that she isn't just convenient or useful, but wanted for her own sake. That night, Tom went through Beth's things. Not to pack them away, not to erase her, but to make room. To create space for someone new, while still honoring who came before. He saved the important things, the things the boys might want one day. Her wedding band to give to Daniel when he was grown. Her favorite shawl, soft blue wool that still smelled faintly of the lavender she used to tuck in her drawers. The family Bible with her script in the margins. Notes she'd made during sermons. Prayers she had written. But the everyday things, the items that kept the house frozen in time, he began to put away. The apron came off its hook. The dried flowers were respectfully buried. The sewing basket was carried to the attic, not thrown out, not destroyed, but stored, preserved for memory, but not to haunt the day-to-day. He found himself talking to Beth as he worked. He felt foolish, but he did it anyway. I met someone, he said to the empty kitchen. Her name is Kate. Kate Wells. She's a widow, too. Been on her own for 3 years. And Beth, she's wonderful with the boys. They come alive around her. Truly alive. Not just surviving. She has a quiet strength, you know? Like you did. Different, but the same, too. He folded the apron carefully, holding it to his chest for a moment. I'm going to ask for her hand. Court her properly. And if she says yes, if she'll have us, I'm going to marry her. I hope that's okay. I hope you're not hurt or angry up there in heaven. I hope you know I'll never forget you, that the boys will never forget you. But we need to live, Beth. Like you said in your letter, we need to live, not just survive. The kitchen was silent. No miraculous sign, no divine confirmation. Just Tom, alone with his late wife's apron and his own hopes and fears. But somehow, in that silence, he felt a peace. He felt that maybe Beth did approve, that maybe she really did want this for them. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Tom woke the boys before sunrise. "We're going to Kate's," he said. "All of us. Right now." They dressed in record time. Benny was so excited he put his shirt on backward and didn't care. Sam even smiled, the first real smile Tom had seen in 3 weeks. Daniel helped his brothers get ready with a gentle efficiency, the responsible older son, making sure they all had warm clothes, warm boots, everything they needed for the journey. Tom saddled the horses and hitched a small wagon for the boys. His hands shook as he worked. What if Ezra was wrong? What if Kate had moved on, decided she was better off alone? What if he got there and she sent him away? But he was doing it anyway, taking the risk because his boys deserved a chance at happiness. And so did he. And so did Kate. And the only way to get that chance was to be brave enough to ask for it. They set out at sunrise, which painted the snow a golden rose. The journey to Kate's took 3 hours, the horses picking their way carefully through the deep snow. The boys were quiet, but it was a different kind of silence now. Not the heavy quiet of grief, but the anticipatory quiet of hope. As they drew near, Tom's heart hammered in his chest. He could see smoke curling from Kate's chimney. She was there. That was good. That was the first hurdle. Now he just had to find the courage to knock on her door and say the words that would either change everything or confirm he'd lost his chance. They pulled up in front of the cabin. Tom helped the boys down from the wagon. The four of them stood there for a moment, staring at the door, staring at the place that in 2 days had felt more like home than their ranch had in 18 months. "You wait here," Tom said. "Let me talk to her first." He walked to the door on trembling legs, raised his hand to knock, and paused. Through the window, he could see her. Kate was at the table, carving. Another bird, Tom realized. Another winter project to mark another season alone. Her head was bent over her work, dark hair falling forward to hide her face. She looked smaller than he remembered, more alone in the cabin that had seemed so warm and alive with his family inside it. Now it looked empty, despite Kate's presence. It looked like a place where someone was surviving instead of living. Tom knocked. Kate looked up, startled. She wasn't expecting visitors. That much was clear from her expression. When she saw who it was through the window, her face went through a complicated series of emotions. Surprise, hope, fear, then a carefully constructed neutrality as she rose and moved to the door. She opened it, standing there, wrapped in a shawl against the chill. "Mr. Brennan," she said, her voice carefully polite, carefully distant. "Kate," Tom said, and his own voice came out rough. "Can I talk to you?" She glanced past him and saw the boys in the wagon. Her face softened for a moment, before she schooled it back into control. "Of course. Come in." She stepped back, letting him enter. The cabin was just as he remembered. Clean, spare, warmed by the fire. The carved birds on the windowsill had a new companion, still unpainted. Another sign of time passing. Another winter survived alone. "The boys," Kate said, not quite a question. "They're fine. Can I bring them in? It's cold." Kate nodded, and Tom went to get his sons. They filed in silently, subdued by uncertainty. Kate looked at them, and Tom saw her face crack slightly, saw the love there, barely contained. She missed them, he realized. She missed them as desperately as they missed her. "Hello, boys," Kate said softly. "Hi, Miss Kate," Benny whispered. She looked at Tom, questions in her eyes. Why are you here? What do you want? Are you going to hurt me again by leaving? Kate, I need to apologize, Tom began. 3 weeks ago, I made a mistake. I left when I should have stayed. I took the boys back to the ranch because I thought it was what I was supposed to do, what was responsible, what honored my wife's memory. But I was wrong. Kate listened with a blank expression, but Tom saw her hands gripping her shawl tightly, saw the tension in her shoulders. Tom explained everything. Beth's letter, Daniel's outburst, Benny's desperate walk into the freezing night, his own realization that he was keeping them all trapped in grief. I'm asking you to let me court you, Tom finished, properly, with the whole town watching. I'm asking for a chance to show you that you matter, that this is real, that I am choosing you, not settling for you. Kate was silent for a long moment. Her face was carefully controlled, but her eyes shone with hurt. When she spoke, her voice was low but steady. No. The word hit Tom like a bullet. Behind him, he heard Benny gasp, felt his son's devastation like a physical blow. No? Tom's voice was almost a whisper. No, Tom. Kate's voice trembled but didn't break. I will not be your second choice. I will not be the woman you turn to when you finally run out of other options. I deserve better than that. Kate, you're not. I am. Her voice rose slightly. You left, Tom. You chose to leave. You chose your grief over happiness. You chose fear over love. And now you want to come back. And I'm just supposed to say yes? Am I supposed to pretend the last 3 weeks didn't happen? Am I supposed to forget how it felt to watch you walk away? Kate, please, listen. I said no. She began to close the door. Mama Kate, please. Benny's voice, desperate and broken. Tom turned to see all 3 boys tumbling out of the wagon, running through the snow. They crashed into Kate before she could shut the door, pulling her down into the snow with the force of their embrace. All 3 of them were crying, pleading, clinging to her as if she were the only thing keeping them from drowning. Please don't say no, Benny wept into her shoulder. Please, we love you. We need you. I'm sorry Pa was scared, but he's not scared anymore. Please give him another chance. Kate held them, her own tears falling now. She looked up at Tom over their heads, and he saw it all in her eyes. The hurt, the love, the desperate hope she'd been trying to kill but couldn't. Get inside, she finally said, her voice hoarse. All of you, before we freeze to death. They stumbled into the cabin. Kate wiped her eyes and composed herself. When she spoke again, her voice was steady. If I agree to this, I have conditions. Real ones, Tom, not just words. Anything, Tom said. You don't just court me, you prove it. You introduce me to everyone. You make it clear that I am not some convenience. Tell me about Beth, she said, her voice steady. So I am not competing with a ghost. And give me time. Whatever time it takes for me to trust in this again. Can you do that? Tom met her gaze. He saw the challenge there, and beneath it, a pain that needed healing. Yes, he said, his own voice thick with emotion. I can do that. I will do it for as long as it takes. Kate glanced at the boys, who were watching them with a desperate sort of hope. She looked back at Tom and saw something in his face that hadn't been there before. Certainty, commitment, a love that felt true and solid. All right, she said softly. All right. You may court me, Tom Brennan, but if you break my heart again, there will not be a third chance. I won't, Tom promised. I swear to you, I won't. For the next 4 weeks, Tom courted Kate properly. He came to her cabin twice a week, always with a chaperone. Sometimes it was Ezra and his wife, Martha. Other times, another neighboring family. He brought small gifts, nothing expensive or improper, just tokens that showed she was on his mind. Fresh eggs from his hens, a book of poetry he'd seen her looking at in the general store, a new paring knife when he noticed hers had grown dull. During those visits, they talked. They truly talked. Tom told her about Beth, how they met, how they courted, what she was like as a wife and a mother. It was painful to speak of it, but it was also a balm. It helped him remember Beth as a whole person, not just the idealized saint he had made her in his grief. It helped him see that loving Kate did not diminish what he'd had with Beth, that his heart was large enough for both. In return, Kate told him about her husband, Michael, about the apothecary shop they had dreamed of opening, about the long illness that took him, and about the deep loneliness of the 3 years since. She spoke of the carved birds in her hope chest, and the slow acceptance that some dreams don't come true in the ways we plan. But sometimes, she said during one visit, her eyes distant, dreams come true in different ways, better ways perhaps. I'll never have children of my own, but I have 3 boys who need a mother. It wasn't what I planned, but it was what I needed. Tom brought the boys to visit her as well, always supervised. Kate began to teach them. She taught Daniel to read the signs of the weather in the clouds and the behavior of animals before a storm. She taught Sam about medicinal plants, showing him which herbs could soothe different ailments, letting him help her prepare remedies for neighbors. And she taught little Benny to carve, her hands guiding his small ones, learning to shape a block of wood into something beautiful. The town noticed. Of course, the town noticed. Nothing stayed secret in a frontier community where gossip was the chief form of entertainment. Tom escorted Kate to church on Sundays, formally introducing her to families he had known for years. He made it clear through every action that this was a courtship, that Kate Wells was important to him, that this was not about convenience or desperation, but about choice. Some people approved. Ezra and Martha were openly supportive, and the younger families were happy for them. But others were less certain. The older women, led by the formidable Abigail Hartford, harbored their reservations. The doctor's office was 3 buildings down from the courthouse. The deputies escorted Caleb there, while Eleanor kept pressure on the wound, her hands steady despite the fear that chilled her blood. The bullet had torn through the flesh of his shoulder, miraculously missing bone and major arteries. It's painful, but not fatal, the doctor confirmed after a swift examination, cleaning and bandaging the wound. You're a lucky man. An inch to the right, and we'd be having a very different conversation. Caleb looked at Eleanor, his gaze unwavering. It wasn't luck, he said. It was purpose. I had something worth protecting. Back at the courthouse, Dalton was in chains, his men disarmed and in custody. The veneer of respectability he had curated for years had been shattered. By trying to shoot Eleanor, he had proven every accusation against him, that he viewed people as property to be controlled or destroyed, that he would use violence to get his way, that he valued power above the law. Marshal Clayton was efficient and authoritative. Dalton was formally charged with attempted murder, on top of the existing charges of fraud and forgery. His lawyer, seeing the tide turn so violently, quietly distanced himself from the case. The town officials who had been in Dalton's pocket suddenly found urgent business elsewhere. By afternoon, Caleb, his arm in a sling, returned with Eleanor to the courthouse for the final proceedings. Judge Blackwood, visibly shaken by the violence that had erupted in his courtroom, addressed the assembly. This court finds that the documents presented by Thomas Dalton concerning Eleanor Stone were fraudulent. The marriage between Caleb Stone and Eleanor Hartwell Stone is lawful and legitimate. Mrs. Stone is a free citizen with all attendant rights and privileges. Furthermore, this court recognizes the broader pattern of corruption and fraud perpetrated by Mr. Dalton and orders a full investigation into all land transactions he has been involved with in the past 5 years. He looked at Eleanor with something akin to respect. Mrs. Stone, my apologies that you were subjected to this ordeal. You have conducted yourself with remarkable dignity and courage. Eleanor rose, still holding Caleb's good hand. Thank you, Your Honor. But I am not the only victim here. There are families all over this territory who lost their land and their livelihoods to Dalton's schemes. I hope justice will extend to them as well. It will, Marshal Clayton assured her. We will conduct a full review. Any families with proof of fraud or coercion should come forward. Illegally seized properties will be returned. And with that, the dam broke. Families who had been too afraid to speak now found their courage in Eleanor's example. The true extent of Dalton's corruption became starkly clear as story after story was told. He had built an empire on the suffering of others, and now that empire was crumbling. As the sun set, Caleb and Eleanor finally left the courthouse, exhausted but profoundly relieved. It was over. Truly, finally over. Dalton was going to prison. His false claims were void. Their marriage was secure. They spent the night in the capital at a modest boarding house. The proprietor, hearing who they were, refused to take their money. You stood up to a tyrant, she said simply. That takes courage. Your money's no good here. Later that night, in the quiet of their rented room, Eleanor helped Caleb change his dressing. Her hands were gentle as she cleaned the wound and applied the salve the doctor had provided. You took a bullet for me, she said, her voice a whisper. You could have died. So could you, Caleb replied, his voice rough. He was aiming for you. I wasn't going to let that happen. He reached up with his good hand and cupped her face. I love you, he said, the words both new and ancient. You brought my life back from the dead. You made me remember what it means to hope, to build, to care about tomorrow. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, even if you came to me in the strangest way imaginable. I love you too, she whispered back, her heart full. Not because you saved me, though you did, not because you gave me a home, though you did that too. I love you because you see me, you respect me, you treat me as an equal partner in everything we do. That is rarer than gold and more precious. They kissed, a tender, profound affirmation of their vows and their commitment. The violence of the day faded, leaving only what mattered. Two people who had found each other against all odds, who had fought together, and who would now build something real and lasting from the rubble of their past lives. We'll go home tomorrow, Eleanor said. Back to our mountain, our land, our life. Home, Caleb agreed. That sounds perfect. And for the first time since Dalton had made his move, they both slept in peace, knowing the threat was gone and the future was theirs to shape. The seeds Eleanor had planted, both literal and metaphorical, had survived the storm. Now, nourished by love and protected by justice, they were free to grow.